Everyone has a purpose in life, but when a child dies young, it can feel as though that purpose was cut short, even stolen. We're left asking questions we don't have easy answers for. What was their life meant to be? What was it worth? How did they leave their mark on the world?
He said, my son wrote, left behind 18 symphonies. What am I going to do with it? Nobody will ever hear my son's music.
Andrea Magder lost her artistic son suddenly to an opioid overdose. From music to poems and a novel, Ethan loved using his creative abilities.
You think when you discover all this work, was it all for nothing?
But Andrea is working to change that. She's created an online gallery that highlights the artwork of artists from around the world who have died, allowing their legacy to continue.
And there's also the case where there are artists who've been discovered after they pass away, so you never know.
In this episode of Grieving Out Loud, Andrea shares her difficult story of loving her son through his struggle with addiction, finding a way to keep going through overwhelming grief, and the way she's now helping others facing loss. Today's guest is someone who lives at the intersection of creativity, grief, and purpose. Andrea Magder is a writer, filmmaker, nonprofit founder, and grief coach. But her story begins as a mother who lost her son, Ethan. After he died, she discovered his unpublished lyrics, essays, and the beginning of a novel. Talking with other families, she realized how often loved ones leave behind creative work and how painful it is to wonder if it will ever be seen. That question led her to create the Artist Lives Gallery, which honors artists who have passed away without being widely recognized, making sure their voices don't disappear. And I want to tell you, this is deeply personal for me because Emily is featured in Andrea's gallery. Her art lives there, and that means more to me than I can really put into words. Andrea also spent years in film and theater, building programs for emerging filmmakers, producing independent films, and earning major recognition for her writing. And today she is back in the nonprofit world. She's also a certified grief coach, specializing in supporting people who've lost loved ones to addiction. Andrea's story is about love, loss, and creativity, and keeping someone's spirit alive through the work that they left behind. Andrea, welcome to Grieving Out Loud.
Thank you. Thank you for having me.
I'm so
Yeah.
delighted to have you, and thank you so much for featuring Emily's artwork on your website. I really appreciate it.
Oh, yeah, no, of course. Her artwork's incredible. So,
I think so, but I'm biased because I'm her mom, right? And I always thought she had so much talent, and I often say that if she would have lived, because she died so young at
I
21,
know.
I wonder how her art would have evolved and even how much better she would have become and what she could have left in the world and left her mark in the world in terms of art.
Right, right, right. Well, this way, it doesn't disappear. So that's the purpose of, why we showcase the work because usually what happens is it gets boxed up or, forgotten over time.
Right. It's really important to me that we keep Emily's artwork out there. We use it so often on our charity. We have a virtual gallery on our website that someone can go on and see all of her
Right.
artwork. We use it in our fundraising events. We have an art show and auction where almost all of her artwork is displayed. She left me with 29 paintings and
Oh,
painted
wow.
objects and pieces of pottery. I'm really lucky that way. There are some things that are lost and some things that were destroyed before her death that I don't have. But even her art teacher had fished, her high school art teacher had fished a couple of her paintings out of the trash and gave them to me
Oh
3 years
my God.
later after her death.
That's crazy.
I
Wow,
know.
that's great though that you were able to get that.
Yes. Yes. I
Yeah.
think it's just so important that we preserve whatever creative work our loved ones left behind. And that really is your whole mission. But let's talk about Ethan first. Tell
Okay.
me about Ethan.
Uh, Ethan was, he struggled with addiction on and off for years. and he was very creative. He wanted to be a writer. He, I didn't even realize how much he actually had written until after he passed, and I discovered all these journals, and he had written a screenplay, and just like a lot of poetry, music, lyrics. And about a month before he passed away, he started writing a novel about his life. He wanted to, help people so they wouldn't go down the same road he went down. And at the time when he told me he was writing that, I felt that, maybe that would give him an incentive,
Right.
to keep going. Having a creative outlet I felt was so important. And, of course, now I know a lot more about addiction than I knew back then.
Yeah,
But
don't we all, right?
yeah, right.
Ethan's struggle with substance use disorder started early, and that can make everything more difficult. Research shows that when teens begin using drugs and alcohol, it can change the brain while it's still developing, especially the parts tied to reward and decision making. That early exposure can also significantly increase the risk of long term addiction.
It started with when he was in middle school,
Mm.
in a over-the-counter antihistamine he found in my medicine cabinet. He called me from school, come pick me up, and that's how it began. And he just experimented. He was always very creative in writing, and he was like very interested in what was going on in the world and politics. And there was a period where he started doing stand-up comedy. And yeah, and a short period where he thought maybe he'd be a comic or he'd be an actor, or, he needed he liked the attention, from the time he was born. He was just that kind of a kid. And and he had such a good heart, and he cared, so deeply about people. And um, he towards right before about 2 years before he passed away. um, I thought, it's hard to know when they're using, if they're not using, when they stop. And he decided to enlist in the Israeli army.
Oh,
Yeah. And he moved to Israel and joined the IDF. And, he doesn't come from like a religious background or anything, but I think he felt like, because he struggled for so many years with addiction, that he, and he hadn't gone to college because of his addiction issues, that it gave him something to say when people said, "What are you doing?" It gave him, he didn't feel like he was, a nobody, which is how I think he felt about himself.
I wonder if it was he was just searching for something, right?
Oh,
Searching
yeah.
for something to help him and thought this would maybe do it, right?
Right. Right.
Yeah.
That's exactly it. And he was more of a creative person. And I worried, I couldn't see him, in the army.
Right, that didn't fit with your description of, like, writer and,
Right.
a comic, that kinda thing. It didn't really fit with that.
Yeah, no,
Yeah.
it didn't at all. And he was doing okay for a while, and then he decided to, and I guess he was using at the time, which I realized after when I found his journals. But I thought, for year I thought during that period he wasn't, and he decided to enlist in combat training, and that was not something for him, and I told him, but he did it anyway, and he just couldn't handle it, and he just spiraled downward from there.
And I think what's so hard about all this, Andrea, is that I know the struggles that you went through. I went through them myself. And even though some scenarios may be different for you and for me and for with our
Hmm.
children, it's still that dark cloud hanging over your head and years of worrying about them and trying to figure out how to help them. And then when you lose them, it feels like, what was all that for?
Exactly. Exactly. No, that's exactly it.
Have you lost a loved one to overdose or fentanyl poisoning? I'd like to invite you to share their story on our new Emily's Hope Memorial website called More Than Just a Number. They were our children, siblings, cousins, husbands, wives, aunts, uncles, and friends. So much more than just a number. You can submit a memorial today on morethanjustanumber.org.
Andrea says her son went through several different rehab programs, but nothing seemed to work. Sometimes Ethan would leave early, other times he would relapse while in treatment. She especially became concerned when he was in Israel, far from home and the support system she hoped would help keep him safe.
He had started writing this book, and he was asking me for notes, and I mean, we spoke every day. We were very close, and I always woke up to a phone call. He was 6, 7 hours ahead, and he called me every morning, and we would talk, and towards the end, he was really, he was not doing well at all. He came back home in April and was with me for a month, and, confessed that he had started using, and he detoxed in my apartment before he went back. And I, I thought he was okay when that night he left, the day before, because he had detoxed. And then the night he was leaving, I could clearly see that he, had taken something. And, of course, it's gone through my head. Why did I let him get on that plane? And
So he got on a plane to go back to Israel?
so he got on a plane and go back, right, because he had gotten a month off to come home.
I see. And then what happened?
And I'm divorced, and my ex and I were, trying to get him discharged from the army so we could get him into a treatment program, and they wouldn't discharge him. And he was clearly suffering, and you could see, he was using, or his mental health was not well. And my ex, I think, by June, July, had made about 3 trips to Israel within a period of 6 weeks, because we were desperate and trying to get him into some kind of treatment and discharged. And he ended up passing in my ex-husband's hotel room
In Israel.
in Israel. Yep,
Oh my goodness. And so then you had to get him back home.
yep, yep. And that took about close to a week.
I bet.
Yeah,
Just to add a complication um, to something so traumatic.
yeah.
And you did mention earlier it took you about a year. So, to get his work out there and to start really thinking about or to look at it even, right? To kind of go through it
Hmm.
or tell me about what you went through during that time.
Well, I mean, I think for any of us, when we lose a child, we're in shock.
Right.
You're just like, you're existing. Like you're not,
Right.
you don't know what to do with yourself. You don't know.
It's like you just wanna crawl out of your brain, right? You just wanna, like,
Yeah,
get out of your own skin. It's hard to describe to people who haven't
it,
been through it.
that's right. That's right. And it's, my mom passed away 5 months after my son.
Oh.
So, and
So you had compound grief.
my mom and I were very, very close. And I think um, my son's death just, she just went down, that did her in.
Too much for her. A broken heart, right?
It
A
was too
broken heart.
much, right? But it took me, and as close as I was to my mom, I mean, we literally spoke like probably 4 times a day. I'd call her with any little thing. And it took me, I think, about 2 years before I could actually grieve for my mom
Oh, I
because the
bet.
grief was so intense after losing Ethan.
Today, Andrea finds comfort in looking at Ethan's work and sharing it with others. But in the months after his death, her grief was so raw, she couldn't bring herself to read the words he had written.
The writing is it's gripping and it's sad, like you said, like what could have been.
Right. I always think that what artwork could she have created,
Right,
had she lived? What could Ethan have written? And I always say that when I talk to groups of people and I show a screen full of faces of young people we've lost to overdose or fentanyl poisoning,
right,
I always say the lost potential to the world. What art could have been created? What books could have been written? What entrepreneurs could have started businesses here?
oh yeah,
Music, we will never know because we've lost way too many young people, including my Emily and your Ethan, in
right,
this horrible epidemic. And Ethan died from an opioid overdose.
correct, correct. So many artists have been lost to addiction or to suicide.
Right. What do you think it is about you're a creative. I mean, I'm a
Right.
bit creative. I write too, but I think my brain is a little more balanced. What do you think of the what do you think it is with the creative brain? Because my daughter was very, um, what do I want to say? She was just extreme about things, right?
Right.
So she would just be so enthusiastic and over the top and dive headfirst into one thing after the other, whether that be, her gymnastics or tie-dyeing or painting or whatever it might be. And I just always thought her brain was wired a little differently.
Yeah, no, creative brains are wired differently. And I think especially with a lot of young people, they, creatively, they just feel like they don't fit in anywhere. And sometimes many of them are just, kind of lost. And I think, that's what leads them often to start experimenting, with drugs, just finding something, you know, even to calm their brain down a little bit, or they're kind of all over the place.
And I think in some cases, creative people might think that drugs expand their creativity, right?
Yeah,
I think
that's
Emily
true.
thought that. I also think of famous creative people who have produced things that, are legendary. You think of musicians or
Mhm.
painters, and so many of them struggled from mental health and or substance use disorder, and, what used to probably be alcohol a lot of the time. But,
Right.
you think of musicians and just it seems to be a really common thread.
Yeah, no, it definitely is.
While substance use disorder is extremely common, stigma often prevents people from talking about it. After her son died, Andrea knew she didn't want to keep his struggle secret. She decided to share his story openly, hoping that being honest may help break the stigma and let other families know they're not alone.
I wanted to do something with addiction. I wasn't even thinking of, showcasing any kind of creative work. I was thinking of setting up programs in the arts for, young adults who were struggling with addiction or mental illness for the same reason that I was trying to encourage my son. And at the time it was too early. He had just passed, and it was very difficult for me to enter into that world and be around, addiction. So I kind of, I put it to the side. And then, and also another thing is early on when I did find his work, I had put it away for probably a year or two because, and I find this with a lot of parents who lose children, it's very painful to go through their work, to look at their work. It's like a knife going through your heart.
Yeah, I get that. I get that. I almost had the opposite reaction. I had immediately wanted to photograph and catalog everything of Emily's. I think I was so worried about losing it or not knowing where
Right,
it was or not having it figured out that I would lose another piece of her.
right, right, right. I understand that more so with visual art, but I think when you get into written works
Right.
and you're hearing, their voice and their struggle, and maybe you're discovering things you didn't know, and that that's difficult. And anyway, so I was tossing around the idea because what do I do with all this work? What's going to happen to it? And I kind of just let it go. And I was in a grief group, and a man started talking. He had just lost his son, and he said, my son wrote, left behind 18 symphonies. What am I going to do with it? Nobody will ever hear my son's music. And that was my cue. And when I left that night, I said, this is what I need to do. I need to get, this work out there so it has a home and it doesn't, you know, fade into obscurity.
What kind of response have you had to your effort to showcase the works of people who have died?
But I've had a, pretty good response. I mean, the only hold the only reason people hold back is just especially if their loved one had just passed, is that it's too early, you know, and they'll get back to, they'll get back and submit work. But for the families that do submit, it's been, and I hear this all the time, how healing it is, and how they, visit the site just to see their loved ones work. And also they have a place they can direct people, like one woman that lost her son said, told me, she says, now at least I have a place if anybody wants to, hear my son's music or learn about him, I can tell them to go to your site.
Yeah, we really have tried to provide something for families as well. We don't, it's not based on art, but we have provided a memorial website, more than just
Right.
a number and more than just a number.org, where people can submit their loved one's story because we feel it's so important. Like these are people, and how so many people are only remembered for how they died, right? Especially when
Exactly.
it's a stigmatized,
That's
shocking
right.
way, whether it
That's
be
right.
suicide or addiction. It just nobody remembers who they were, and we want as their loved ones, we want people to remember them for who they were.
Right, or introduce them to
Yeah,
the world, you know, because people, they think addict, or they,
yeah.
they don't realize, who they actually were and what they contributed and what they left. And yeah, no, it's so important. We're also on our website, aside from showcasing um, the creative work, we just started like a week or two ago, introducing legacy stories. So people can, submit stories about their loved one, necessarily about their creative work, but who they were.
Right. Right. So
Yeah.
not really, you're not thinking so much a bio, but maybe like a specific story from someone's
Yeah.
life. That's cool. I love that
Right.
idea.
Right. Right.
Yeah.
A reflection, or, it could be a memory. It could be anything.
Right. And
Yeah.
so what have you learned as you've been doing this and you've been taking people's stories for a little while now and showcasing their art, and what have you learned through this process?
I've learned how I can't how much creative work is out there. We hear about people that are well known that pass away,
Sure.
and their work gets seen or heard, and we remember. But most artists never had any public recognition, and
Right.
it's amazing how much is left.
That's one thing that really struck me when we did our first Emily's Hope art show and auction, and I had this idea. We cataloged all our art, and I wanted to showcase it, and we were able to get in to a local gallery, a pretty big gallery in my community. It that takes a year or two on a waiting list, but miraculously there was a cancellation, and Emily's work was hung on the walls of this
Oh,
gallery, and I sat there on a bench in that gallery after all the work was up and cried
oh,
because she never got to experience that.
right.
The closest she ever came was we had a friend who has like a soul cycling place, and he has all
Hmm.
these white walls, and he asked if she could hang her walls there. So all the people
Right.
coming in and out of the soul cycling place could see it. And she was so excited about that. And she worked so hard on
Oh,
getting all that ready. That was a thrill for her, but she didn't get to experience it in a gallery. And it made me so sad. But I was grateful at the same time. It's bittersweet, right? I was
right.
grateful at the same time that her work was hung up here and people were coming in to look at it.
Right, right. Well, that's the other thing with our site is that, at least it continues. It wasn't, because you think when you discover all this work, was it all for nothing?
Right.
You know?
Right.
And here, it's still out there. And maybe, which I believe they know wherever they are, that we're continuing their story.
Yeah, I sure hope so.
Are you ready to protect the next generation from the dangers of substance use? Emily's Hope has created a comprehensive K 12 substance use prevention curriculum designed to educate, empower, and equip students with the tools they need to make healthy choices. Our age-appropriate lessons start in kindergarten and build through high school, using science, real stories, and interactive learning to help kids understand their bodies, brains, and risk of drug use. We're already reaching thousands of students across multiple states, and we're just getting started. Visit emilyshopeedu.org to learn more and share our curriculum with your school administrators and counselors. At Emily's Hope, we believe prevention begins with education. Let's work together to keep our kids safe. You can check out the artist's work, including Ethan's and Emily's, by visiting the Artist Lives website. We've included a link in the show notes for this episode. While you're there, we just love it if you take just a moment to rate and review this podcast, and please share it with someone you know needs to hear it. The more people who hear these stories, the more we can raise awareness about substance use disorder and hopefully decrease the stigma surrounding the disease and encourage those who are struggling to seek help.
You became a grief coach through this process.
I did. I did, but only a year ago.
Oh,
So
well,
it's,
me too. I think it was about it. I went through a grief education course, and became
right.
a grief educator. I lead a support group of other parents like us,
Okay.
and so I thought I should do that, and I think it's been helpful. I think it was about a year and a half, maybe 2 years ago that I went through that. It took me a while before I really wanted to do that.
Yeah. Well, through going to support groups, and I met so many other, you know, uh, parents, especially moms that had lost their kids. I was, a year or 2 or 3 years in, so I knew what they were going through, and so I spent a lot of time trying to help them before I actually decided, this is something I should I should do. And I recently, over the summer, I started writing a book.
In her book, Andrea wants to reach out to other parents who have lost children. She hopes her words offer comfort and healing and help them find a way forward through what can feel like unimaginable pain.
After I lost my son, I read so many grief books. There was nothing. I mean, there were memoirs, or they were, healing, but there was nothing that actually told you what to do. Like tips, tools, strategies, how to respond to somebody when they ask you how many children you have,
That's
or
a tough one. How do you respond? Because we talk about that in our support group quite a bit. What you say people should do? How should they respond when people ask? And maybe you don't want to go into the problem is like you maybe don't want to go into the whole story if you're just meeting
right,
someone briefly.
right. I think it depends who's asking.
Right.
If it's somebody, you're talking to for 5 minutes, but I have a daughter also.
Mhm.
So I always say I have two children because I don't want to deny my son's existence. I
Right.
feel that's really important. He was here, he mattered, and I'm still his mom, you
Right.
know? So I do say too, but it depends, I can understand why people hesitate.
What has grief taught you?
I guess just that still feel it's I'm still connected to people who pass away, that I maybe because I've had so many signs and different things happen that I can't really explain since my son passed away, that I feel, it's comforting to me. And I feel that I feel he's still with me. And that's definitely helped with my grief. And I, I think it taught me that we still, you know, whether you believe it or not, there's something to be said about that. We still, connect. We're still around.
Yeah, that's really beautiful, and I think I've talked to so many parents, and I myself would agree with you on that. I've had a lot of things happen that you can't explain and signs and things that give me hope that, uh, Emily is still with me somehow, and I
Mm-hmm.
feel that. You feel it, right? It's not
Yes.
even, um
Yeah.
you feel your child is still with you. At least energy never dies, right? I mean,
No.
where does the
No.
energy go? We
Right.
don't have all the answers.
No.
We can have faith, we can have lot beliefs, we can have lots of things,
Right.
but we don't really know. But I do
Right.
think there are a lot of parents who would say the same exact thing that you just said.
Yeah. Yeah.
And so if people want to contribute to your Artist Lives gallery, what would you suggest they do?
Go to our website, theartistlives.org, and there's a submission form on our site. And we love to honor all these, you know, artists that passed away, and visual art, music, writing. It doesn't matter, how old they were, or background, or we don't curate anything because, it's not about that. It's about sharing the work. That's the most important thing. So we don't judge whether, something is worthy of um, having a platform or not.
Well, that's wonderful, and it's a wonderful outlet for people and a way to pay tribute to their loved ones, and to celebrate their lives and their talent. And art is subjective, so, you
Right.
know,
Right.
yeah. And I think
Right.
it's wonderful that you're doing this. Thank you so much. Thank you for
Yeah,
featuring
of
Emily and
course.
her work. And
Oh,
I don't know how
yeah.
you found me because you reached out to me and I was like, of course I will provide you with pieces of her
Yeah.
work because I always love to share that.
Yeah. Yeah. And any other work you have, we'd love to, include it in on her page and stories and there's also the case where there are artists who've been discovered after they pass away, so you never know.
And I am anxious to read your book when you're finished with that. Will you come back on the podcast when that's done?
I will. I
Okay,
will. Thank you.
fantastic. Fantastic.
Thanks so
Well, thank you
much.
so much, Andrea. It's been
Yeah.
a pleasure to meet you this way and to get to know a little bit more of Ethan's story and the incredible work that you're doing.
Oh, thank you so much for having me.
And thank you for listening to this episode of Grieving Out Loud. Check out hundreds of other episodes anytime on our website, emily'shope.charity. While you're there, you'll find the latest news headlines on substance use disorder and the overdose epidemic, along with my personal blog, plus ways to get involved in our mission. Thank you again for listening. Until next time, wishing you faith, hope, and courage. This podcast is produced by Casey Wannenberg King and Kaylee Fitz.